Hello everyone, Takuya here, and welcome back to the History of Everything podcast YouTube channel. And on today's episode, I'm going to be presenting you 3 facts that you probably didn't know about Rome. I mean, hey, if you did, good for you. Pat yourself on the back right now and go ahead and like this video in order to show just how smart you are. Hint. You should probably like the video anyway right now because it definitely helps me out. Please do it. Also, everyone, just as a heads up, this video is part of a series of videos that we're going to be doing about Rome this week, all for the podcast episode at the end of this week on Friday, which again is going to be on ancient Rome. There's going to be a lot of these, so make sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more. And also make sure to get this month's audiobook for a huge discount down in the description below. Thank you all, and enjoy the video. Number 1 on our list, graveyard prostitutes. And yes, you did hear me right. Now that off the bat is going to sound like a really weird thing, but you have to remember that prostitution in ancient Rome was a very heavily institutionalized thing. It had tens of thousands of different people at any given time participating in what was easily the world's oldest profession, all the while paying taxes to the state. Which of course, from that taxes, especially going into the 1st century AD, the Roman state didn't really mind. They appreciated the extra money. And just like what you would probably think of today, among Roman prostitutes, there was a severe division in ranks. You had high class, middle class, and of course the lower class types of prostitutes, of which there were many different subcategories that each one of them had. But among all these, there's perhaps one that is the most interesting, the bustiarii, the cemetery prostitute. The bustiarii were the lowest of the low in terms of the hierarchical scale of Roman prostitution. These would be individuals that would mainly operate within the graveyards and the underground tombs of Rome. They were described as shameful, gaunt, pale, and sickly, all descriptions that were more akin to actually being dead themselves. Throughout the morning and going into the day, they would offer their services as professional mourners, which might sound weird, but yes, that was a thing. You would quite literally pay people to mourn and cry for you if you were wealthy enough, and that's something they did. But at night, things got spicier. One of the things that the bustiarii would do is that they would use chalk on the back of headstones in order to advertise their prices for, services. And they would engage in said services within the tomb passages as well as secluded plots of the cemetery itself. As for the people who would go and actually use such a service, well, it varied. You could have people that were grave diggers, perhaps members of society that were deemed untouchable or undesirable by the rest. Or, if they got lucky and were particularly persuasive, or if they were a bit more persuasive and particularly more skilled, they could perhaps lay their hands on a vulnerable widower, someone who had recently just lost his wife and now is looking to escape said misery. The worst part about all this, the fee for such a lady was oftentimes not more than the price of a loaf of bread. And that is just sad. And speaking of bread, that brings us to the second thing on this list, how it was possible for a baker to commit fraud in ancient Rome. Now, I will say this from the beginning, but the importance of bread throughout all of history is not something that can be overstated. In Rome especially, bread would serve as a kind of key source of food, but also as a political tool by the elites in order to control the masses. The source of this second part can be largely traced back to something called the cura annone, the care of Annona. This was the distribution of grain to Roman citizens that began in 123 BC as a kind of welfare. And it was through this that Romans had the ingredients to make bread, even if they didn't have money to actually get any other food. Later, those who would receive the grain distribution were instead given actual loaves of bread, eliminating the need for them to go and make the bread themselves. But while this may seem like something that was kind charity, the reality of it was that this was a state welfare program that was used by politicians in order to curry favor with the masses. It's way more political than you would think. But it is because that bread is associated with the Roman state that the Roman state would then need to go and actually interfere in the lives of bakers and make sure that they weren't committing fraud. In order to mitigate that, they would use something called a bread stamp, where the baker would use a stamp in order to imprint his name, location, etc. upon the bread so that people knew where it came from. Now you're probably gonna look at this and you're gonna wonder, okay, well, why? Why is it that that is something that would happen? Well, a stamp on a loaf of bread meant that that loaf of bread could again be traced back to the baker that made it. This could mean that if a baker was trying to do something like use smaller amounts of grain to produce smaller loaves in an attempt to make more money by selling the excess grain or using excess grain to make loaves to sell themselves, that they wouldn't be able to do so. Fraud with bread is actually something that was fairly common throughout human history. The Romans were not the first ones to have to do this, and they were not going to be the last. And so, in the end, by simply using a stamp on a loaf of bread, if you had a baker that was mixing 90% wheat with 10% sawdust, then the person that tasted said sawdust would be able to trace that loaf of bread back to the person that made it and potentially take grievance with them, so to speak. Again, this was a very severe crime in ancient history. And speaking of crimes, we are going to have to talk about gladiators because of course this is a video on Rome, and what else are we going to do? A number of you that are watching this probably already have preconceived notions on what exactly a gladiator is. After all, Hollywood movies and television shows oftentimes will go and depict gladiatorial bouts as a kind of bloody free-for-all, where in the end, the winners emerge victorious to live another day while their opponent lays, well, deceased at their feet. Or immediately after, if they're not dead yet, then they get the thumbs down and they are made to be deceased. But that is not how things would work for the majority of gladiators. When you had gladiatorial contests, these were things that were typically single combat between two men who were similar size and in experience. It wasn't something that was just a slaughter. Referees would oversee the action and probably would step in to stop the fight as soon as one of the participants was seriously wounded and not able to continue with the match. One of the funny things is, if that match was dragged out for too long, potentially speaking, the referee could just stop it entirely because now the crowd was going to be getting bored because there was no resolution to it. You didn't want your gladiators to just go into something and immediately die. And there is a very key reason for that. The process of housing, training, feeding, and preparing a gladiator to actually be a gladiator was a very expensive process. And so if you spent all of this time, money, effort, etc. training a gladiator to actually be one, only for them to die within the first 5 minutes of entering the arena on their first day, that is a really bad investment that most people are just not going to be able to handle. The short of it was that in the end, unless this was some type of execution, the goal was not to kill your opponent. It was to win in the most showy and entertaining way possible. That being said, of course, we're talking about blood sports. It is something that was exceptionally dangerous, and so for the majority of gladiators, they wouldn't exactly live very long anyway. Even if you had safety precautions, it's still estimated that anywhere between 1 in 5 and 1 in 10 gladiatorial rounds still ended with one of the opponents dead. But hey, that is the end of today's episode, and this has been Sakui with the History of Everything podcast YouTube channel. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this new little style of video. Let me know in the comment section below what it is that you think. If this video does really well and people like this, I want to do more of these types of videos about different people, cultures, and things all over the course of history because, well, people know me for my short, fun videos anyway, so I think I'd like to do more of that. As always, I ask that you like, comment, and subscribe. Please make sure to go down to the links below and join Discord so that you can participate in some of our games and simultaneously our history chats. Check out my coffee, check out my Patreon, and I hope you all have a good rest of your day. Thanks, guys, and goodbye.